This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay. Agun Erev Shabbos Rabbeisai, as we prepare for Shabbos Chanukah, Haba Aleinu L'Toiva. Welcome everyone to our Erev Shabbos Shiur. Usually we do Biur Tefillah, but L'Kavod Chanukah, we're going to have a Shiur on Chanukah. Today's Shiur is sponsored by our good friend, Rabbi Tzala Rose, Nishmas, his brother, Tzvi Ben Levi Yitzchak, Nisham Shavan Aliyah. Welcome everybody. This is a very interesting subject. The Rambam tells us in Hilchos Chanukah, B'bayis Sheni, in the second temple, Kishamalchu Yavan. Kishamalche Yavan goes to exile. So when the kings of Greece decreed decrees on the Jewish people, and they abolished the religion, and they didn't allow us to engage in learning Torah and mitzvahs, and they took our money and our daughters, and they entered the Heichal, and they made breaches in the Heichal, and they contaminated everything that was pure, and they distressed the Jewish people very much, and they pressured them, a great lachatz, Ad sherichim aleim alekei aviseinu, until the God our forefathers had mercy on them, v'hoshia miyadam, and they saved us from their hands, v'hitzilem, and they, Hashem was matzilas, the Gavru b'nei Chashmonaim, and the children of Chashmonaim prevailed, HaKohanim, HaGdolim. V'hargam, they killed them. V'ashir Yisrael miyadam, they saved the Jewish people. V'ha'amidai melech min HaKohanim, and they appointed a king from the Kohanim. V'chazra Malchus liYisrael, and sovereignty returned to the Jewish people. Yeser al Masayim shanim, more than 200 years. Ad HaChurban HaSheni, until the second temple. Marav Rabbeisai, dear friends, this is the Rambam speaking. The Rambam is not a historian and he's not a storyteller. The Rambam is purely a halachist in the Yad HaChazaka. He tells you what to do and what not to do. He doesn't give you history. Now here, the Rambam has to give you some history because we have to know why we celebrate Chanukah. So you say, why doesn't he do that for every Yom Tov? Because every Yom Tov it says in the Torah why we celebrate. Chanukah doesn't say anywhere. Okay, so the Rambam has to give us the basic details. But why does the Rambam need to give us more details than the Gemara does? The Gemara says, the Yavanim defiled all the oil, and we didn't have any oil, and we prevailed, and we found oil, and we lit it, and it lasted for 8 days. First of all, why is the Rambam telling me it happened during Bayis Sheni? What difference does it make? Bayis Rishon, Mishkan Shiloi, Mishkan Noiv, why is it of relevance during what temple era it happened? And more importantly, which is the focus of today's Shiur, is why does the Rambam say that they appointed a king from the Kohanim? That's irrelevant to the Chanukah miracle. The miracle is that we won the war, and we restored the temple, and we lit the menorah. What happened politically after that is of no relevance to the Chanukah story. And why does the Rambam... Good. Even more, like Rabbi Yosef is pointing out, not only is it not relevant, it was a sin. The Ramban says in Parshas Vayechi that the reason the Chashmonaim were wiped out is because they took the mantle of leadership. So aside from the fact that it's irrelevant, because it was wrong, that's very much part of the fact that it's irrelevant. It has nothing to do with the Chanukah story. It wouldn't even seem to be something we're proud of. As the Ramban learns, they were punished severely for it. And the Rambam seems to incorporate the fact that we regained sovereignty for 200 years as part of the miracle of Chanukah. In other words, the fact that the Rambam includes this in the Chanukah story implies part of the celebration is not just the restoration of the temple and the lighting of the menorah, but the restoration of Jewish sovereignty then and for 200 years. So many Achronim ask, and here we have it on the sheet, from the Sefer Kuntra Shiurim Begittin, why does the Rambam add that they restored sovereignty until the second temple? The Rambam is trying to tell me the miraculous element. And why does he need to say that Malchus was restored to the Jewish people? The way Reb David Cohen of Gvul Yavitz, Coney Island, asked the question that apparently the concept of the restoration of Jewish sovereignty is essential to the miracle. Otherwise, the Rambam would not mention a side point. But I like the way Rabbi Yerucham Oshen, Rosh Yeshiva of Lakewood, asked the question. He says, that which the Rambam says they made a melech, which is mashma that this was part of the salvation, says the Yorech L'Mayadim, how does that have any connection to the Jewish salvation? The salvation was, we won the war and we restored the temple and we found oil. Politically, what happened after that is not part of the Chanukah story. Why is the Rambam included? And, like Rabbi Yosef asked, we find that the Chashon were punished that they restored Malchus and they took it away from Yehuda and they took it to the Kohanim. Melucha doesn't even belong to the Kohanim. So that demonstrates that it's not logical that it should be part of the miracle if it was such a sin. Says Rabbi Yerucham Oshin, Loy ala harambam telunoi seichem. Our complaints should not be addressed to the Rambam because if you read the Gemara carefully, the Gemara seems to emphasize this. And there's something I didn't realize. You ever see this Gemara before? My Chanukah, right? This has got to be the most famous Gemara in Shas. What's Chanukah? The Tanu Rabbanan on the 25th day of Kislev. They're matame all the Shmonaim. Uchshe Gavra Malchus beis Chashmonaim. When the sovereignty of the house of the Chashmonaim prevailed, then they only found enough oil for 1 day and they lived for 8 days. So says Rabbi Yerucham Oshin, it appears that we can be medayik from Shas that the Indian of Malchus Chashmonaim is connected to Chanukah because the Gemara's lashon is Uchshe Gavra Malchus beis Chashmonaim, and from this lashon that it calls the Chashmonaim Malchus, that implies that the salvation has something to do with Malchus. And what is the connection between the Malchus and the salvation of Chanukah? Now, Rabbi Yerucham Oshin says a very beautiful pshat based on the altar of Kelm, but we're not going to go there today. I want to bring to your attention two sort of ways of understanding this Rambam. Both are quite beautiful and important. We know that one of the essential mitzvos of Chanukah is Hallel. If you look in the Gemara says, what's Chanukah? Kavum v'asam yom tovim b'Hallel v'hoida. In other words, if you go through Chanukah and you don't have potato latkes, you're yotzei Chanukah. If you don't have jelly donuts, you're also, I'm going to tell you chiddush now, you're yotzei. My father told me a very important lesson about the donuts. He says it's important to adhere to that which Chazal say. Ein lanu rishus lehishtamesh bahem ela leroisam bilvad. That's the yesod with. I'm sorry, I don't mean to burst your donuts, but okay. The Gemara Megillah says, but if you don't say Hallel, then you didn't have Chanukah. Because Chanukah is not a Yom Tif. You're allowed to do Malach. It's a Yom Tif to say Hallel. So if you don't say Hallel, you blew Chanukah. Now we know we don't say Hallel on Purim. Why not? The Gemara Megillah asks that the whole makar of reading the Megillah is a Kal V'chomer. The Kal V'chomer is, if from Avdus L'cheiros we sing Shira, we sang Oz Yashir. If when God took us out of the sea, we sang Oz Yashir, then Alachas Kama V'kama, when Hashem saved our lives in the times of Purim, we have to learn the Megillah. So the Gemara says, well, if they said Hallel when God took them out of Mitzrayim, you should say Hallel on Purim. And the Gemara says, no, Purim happened in Chutz Haaretz, Yetzias Mitzrayim, and therefore we don't say Hallel. Or the Gemara says, Kriyasa zu Helela. Reading the Megillah is Hallel. Or the Gemara says, when we say Hallel, Hallelu Avdei Hashem. Sing to God, servants of God. But we can't say Hallel in the aftermath of Purim because by Pesach, V'loy Avdei Paroi. We were servants of God, not servants of Paroi. But over here, Avdei Hashem, V'loy Avdei Achashverosh. You can't say Hallel and say we're the servants of God and not the servants of Achashverosh. Akati Avdei Achashverosh, and we're still the servants of Achashverosh. So whenever you have a ruler of flesh and blood, you can't say Hallel. So comes Rabbi Avram Gorwitz, Rosh Shiva of Gateshead, and he quotes his friend Hagoin Rabbi Yisrael Yo Weintraub, I believe a great Makubal, And he quotes the Sefer Ner Tamid, and I tell you, I looked up in the Ner Tamid, I did not find it there, but he quotes him, that Rav Weintraub wants to say, a chidush ayom v'noira, and others say this as well. You know why the Rambam says in the times of Chanukah we restored Malchus Yisrael? Because otherwise we wouldn't be able to say Hallel. Because you can only say Hallel if you're Avdei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and not your Avdei Paroi, and not your Avdei Achashverosh. On Purim we can't say Hallel because Akati Avdei Achashverosh Anan. So how are you allowed to say Hallel on Chanukah? Akati Avdei Antiochus Anan. We're still the servants of Antiochus. Therefore the Rambam was compelled to say part of the Chanukah story is that we returned power into the hands of Jewish sovereignty. The Jewish people regained sovereignty, they regained royalty, so we are not Avdei Antiochus, we're Avdei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and now we're able to say Hallel. So the Rambam is not telling me historical information, he's telling me halachic information. That the reason I'm allowed to say Hallel is because sovereignty was returned to the Jewish people. So, V'al Pizeh, Yesh Loimar, that the reason why the Rambam says that sovereignty returned to Yisrael, because the Rambam says that Chanukah is Yimei Hallel, and he also says you say Hallel on Chanukah, and if there's ever any chisaron in Akati Avdei Achashverosh Anan, you can't say Hallel, because it says Hallelu Avdei Hashem. Therefore the Rambam has to say that that's not a problem with Chanukah, and therefore we're allowed to say Hallel. Now, comes Reb Avram Gorowitz and he says, wait a second, that only works if the Rambam holds that the reason we don't say Hallel on Purim is because Akati Avdei Achashverosh Anan. And then the Rambam would have to say, but we do say Hallel on Chanukah because we regain sovereignty. However, the Rambam is of the opinion that we don't say Hallel on Purim because Kriyasa Zuhi Helela, because reading the Megillah is Hallel. So that doesn't apply to Chanukah, so we would say Hallel on Chanukah, and the Rambam would have no need to say that sovereignty returned to the Jewish people. Meaning, this pshat of Reb Weintraub only works out if the Rambam holds the reason we don't say Hallel on Purim is because Akati Avdei Achashverosh Anan. But if the reason we don't say Hallel on Purim is because Kriyasa Zuhi Helela, that doesn't apply to Chanukah. So this pshat, says Reb Gorowitz, doesn't work out. Because the Rambam paskins like Rav Nachman that the reason we don't say Hallel on Purim is because of Kriyas HaMegillah is in lieu of Hallel. He doesn't hold of Rava of Akati Avdei Achashverosh Anan. However, says Rav Gorowitz, a very nice idea. There are a number of Gersois in the Gemara Megillah. Our Gersa is Rava Amar. Rava Amar. Now, when a Gemara says Rava Amar, name says, that means he's arguing. But Rashi's Gersa is Amar Rava. According to that, Rava is not arguing, Rava is giving an additional reason. It's another reason. Meaning both are true. And it could be this reason because of Alela. Rav is giving another reason we don't say Hallel on Purim. Because Akati Avdei Achashverosh Anan. Now the Gers of the Rif and the Rosh is Maskefla Rava. So they hold Rav is arguing Rav Nachman. That you can't say the reason of Kriyasa Zuhi Helela, that reading the Megillah is Hallel, because there's no Hallel on Purim. But Rashi may learn that it's not a machlokes. Now, I saw last night in the Sefer Kunshas Shiurim Begittin that actually the Rishonim, that this Chidush that Reb Weintraub wants to say, that the restoration of Jewish monarchy and sovereignty was necessary in order to say Hallel, and that's why the Rambam mentions it. The Kolboi explicitly says that on Chanukah the reason we're allowed to say Hallel is because sovereignty and monarchy return to the Jewish people. He says, "Ube'emes kitvareinu mafur shehedya b'chol ba yochos purim ein sham b'tach dvarav." He says that here. Let's read it over here. V'yesh tam acher b'gemara. There's another reason in the Gemara. The heichal lemru Hallel. Hallelu avdei Hashem v'lo avdei Achashverosh. Zakati avdei Achashverosh. And Ratzalom sheba'oisei hazman hoyu begolos adayin tachas yad oisei rasha. We can't say Hallel on Purim because we're still under the clutches of Achashverosh. And we can't say Hallel only on a Geula Shlema like Yetzias Mitzrayim. Or Chanukah, Shechazra Lohem HaMalchus. Wow. Chanukah, we're allowed to say Hallel because we restored Malchus and then we could say Hallel. Now, by the way, according to that, we could just add that while maybe the Kohanim should not have taken the Malchus, they did do a great thing for the Jewish people. Why is that? Because when we're under foreign sovereignty, we're not the servants of God. We're the servants of the monarch of the nations of the world. But when the Jewish people have their own sovereignty, then we are not the servants of Matasyahu or Yochanan. We're the servants of God. The purpose of Jewish sovereignty is to reflect the Malchus Shamayim. So maybe there was some kind of infraction that they took it for themselves, but certainly the institution of Jewish sovereignty is a great institution because then it's just us and God with no king, no real king above us other than the Rebbe Hashem. Now, in the Sefer Be'ikvei Hatzoin of Rav Hershel Schachter, he also deals with this language of the Rambam. Why does the Rambam say that Malchus was restored to the Jewish people for 200 years? So he quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that upon entry into Eretz Yisrael, we have 3 mitzvahs. Number 1, we have to appoint a king. Number 2, we have to cut down the children of Amalek, the descendants of Amalek. We have to destroy Amalek. And number 3, we have to build a temple. In that order, make a king, destroy Amalek, build the temple. By the way, one of the reasons why the Bayis Sheni did not have full Kedusha is because in the times of Mordechai and Esther, we didn't fully wipe out Amalek. And one of the reasons why we didn't fully wipe out Amalek is because they weren't really kings. And we once explained that's the reason why Mordechai wanted to mint coins, because he wanted to establish himself as a king to destroy Amalek, so we could build a temple. That's the 3-pronged approach of how to build a temple. King, destroy Amalek, build a temple. In that order. You can't have a temple and then make a king and then destroy Amalek. It has to be in that order. Now, in the times of the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash, says Rav Schachter, there was no Jewish sovereignty. Even though they were redeemed to an extent and they had a Beis Hamikdash, like the Ramban says, it was not a Gula Shlema because they didn't have a king and they didn't destroy Amalek. And that's why it says in the Navi Chagai, Va'ertza ba va'achabda, without a hey, that they were missing 5 things in times of the Bayis Sheni, because they were not Mekayim, the Mikdash, properly. They didn't make a king and they didn't destroy Amalek. Now, says Rav Schachter, after the fact, when the Malchus of the Chashmonaim was established, he says an interesting idea, and I agree with it. Even though the Gemara says it has to be in that order, king, destroy Amalek, Mikdash, nevertheless, I believe it's reasonable to say the Mikdash was lacking because they didn't have a king and they didn't destroy Amalek. But let's say somewhere 200 years into the temple, they could appoint a king. Would you think appointing a king would add prestige to the Mikdash? I would think so. But it's not in the right order. Okay, nobody said all of a sudden the Shekhinah is coming back the way it once was. But it's got to add something. If the Torah wants us to have a king, destroy Amalek, build a Mikdash, and we couldn't do the first 2, and now after the fact we could do one of them, that certainly adds some sanctity to the Mikdash. This, I think, explains what the Rambam is saying, that the Chashmonaim restored Jewish sovereignty, and it restored for 200 years because something happened to the temple when Jewish monarchy was established. It gave more spiritual standing to the Beis Hamikdash.
But if we want to be medayik in the lashon of the Gemara says Garu Malchus Chashmonaim, right?
Yeah.
That's not really what happened. They weren't the Malchus when they were victorious. They only got the Malchus after the victory. That Lashon implies that they were Malchus before the victory.
Good question. Actually, Rabbi Rucham Oshin asked that question, and he says a whole approach which would answer that question as well. And I do admit what we're going to say won't be answering that question. In a way, though, the Rambam contradicts the Gemara. Because the Rambam does not say it that way. The Rambam says that they prevailed and they established a melech, and it continued for 200 years. So that's another interesting point. The Gemara implies they had monarchy the whole time. Okay. Now, even though the Bayis Sheni was not b'shleimus, because they didn't wipe out Amalek, and they didn't do it in order, but Rav Shachter says a svar, and again, not that he needs my endorsement, but I think it's very reasonable. Nitoisef inyan ma b'chashivusay shel hamikdash. There was a degree of importance added to the mikdash b'mashnas yasta oz memshalas Yisrael through Jewish sovereignty. Like the Rambam is mashma, that the Rambam Hilchos Chanukah says v'chazra Malchus liYisrael yasal masayim shana until the second base of mikdash. The simple reading of the Rambam is mashma that this is what we're celebrating. Now, even though all the Yomim Tovim mentioned in Megillas Taanis have to be connected to the Binyan HaMikdash and being mechanech la'avodah, but even establishing Shultan Yehudi be'Eretz Yisrael, Jewish sovereignty adds to the chashivos of not just the prestige, the halachic chashivos. And by the way, Rav Shachter says the same diuk that we pointed out from Rabbi Rucham Oshin, that the Rambam probably got it from the Lashon of the Gemara, Shegavra Malchus Beis Chashmonaim. The Masha She'inyan Ayos Malchus by Gam Kim Mishum Chashivos, fine. And now, I would like to present to you the approach of Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, Zechazak Levracha, in the Pachad Yitzchak, of the element here of the restoration of Malchus Yisrael. And this is very interesting, and there are elements of it that are somewhat esoteric that I sort of omitted for just to keep things as clear as possible. Number one, he quotes the Rambam. And he's medayik that the fact that the Rambam tells us the story happened in Bayis Sheni, something that indicates that this is intertwined into the essence of Chanukah. Why would it matter that the story happened by Bayis Sheni? Of what relevance is it that it happened in Bayis Sheni? Well, let's say it happened in Mishkan Shiloh, like we asked before, or in Yavan, whatever it is. Furthermore, the Rambam adds to the details mentioned in Alanisim the fact that the Chashmonaim restored Malchus Yisrael. That implies the restoration of Malchus Yisrael was also part of the miracle of Chanukah. And again, Rav Hutner says the same diuk that we brought from Yerucham Oshin and Rav Shachter, that the Rambam got it from the Gemara, Shegavra Malchus Beis Chashmonaim. That means, Joe asked, the Gemara says that there were a Malchus before the miracle, so Rav Hutner addresses this. They're called a Malchus based on their destiny. They were destined for Malchus. And the Rambam holds part of my Chanukah, the Gemara had a question, my Chanukah, part of the answer to that is the restoration of Jewish sovereignty. As if this is inherently intertwined in the definition of Chanukah. Now, this is where it gets amazing. We say every day in davening, Ad Yavor Amcha Hashem, Ad Yavor Amzu Kanisa. Yeah, Ad Yavor Amcha Hashem, Ad Yavor Amzu Kanisa. Until your people cross over, God, until your people that you acquired cross over. From here, Chazal derive, we entered Israel twice, Bia Rishayna and Bia Shnia. Once in the times of Yoshua ben Nun and once in the times of Ezra. And these two comings are compared to each other. They're hukah shel hadadi. And the Chachamim say that by Bia Shnia, in the times of Ezra, we should have been worthy of miracles, like in the times of Bia Rishona, but we sinned. You know what Chazal say? The same way when we entered the land the first time, God did so through great miracles. When we entered Israel the second time, we should have also entered with great miracles. Did we enter with great miracles second time? No, we just conquered. Why didn't we enter with great miracles? Because most Jews preferred to stay in New York than to go back to Israel. I mean Bavel. Yeah?
But the fact that the Chashmonaim were able to overcome the Romans or the Greeks, that was also a great miracle.
1 second. But that wasn't an entering the land. That was 200 years later. Now, but that is important. So Chazal are saying, we enter in times of Joshua miraculously. We should have entered in times of Ezra miraculously, but because of the Chait, so we couldn't. Now, what does that mean we didn't enter miraculously? We had to do it through politicians, through Koresh, through Trump, but by Bia Rishona, we went in Biyad Ramah, and we conquered. Yeah? In other words, the first time around, we didn't have to come on to politicians. Second time around, we had to take natural means because of our sin. Says Rav Hutner, most people think that this means that because we sinned, the hekish is off, and even though we should have entered miraculously, and comparing the second coming to the first coming, no, our sin destroyed the hekish, and the second coming had to be natural. However, this is erroneous, because a chait cannot destroy a hekish. A chait can only postpone a hekish. So yes, we were supposed to enter miraculously. We didn't. We postponed it. We entered, but the miraculous part of it had to be postponed 200 years to the times of Chanukah. The Yad Ramah of Bayis Sheni was Chanukah. So Bayis Rishon, the coming and the miracle was simultaneous. Bayis Sheni, the coming was when we entered, and the miracle was when we conquered. Now, it was in the times of Chanukah. So it comes out that the second entering had two levels. Coming in the times of Ezra, and the fulfillment of the Hekish in the times of the Chashmonaim. And the Biyad Ramah, Bia Shnia, came about by destroying Yavan. Why was it that the Yad Ramah of the second coming specifically occurred through the conquering of Yavan? Now let us analyze Golus Yavan. Do you remember there's a man by the name of Abraham? And he said at the Bris Ben Abasarim, V'hine Ema Gedoyla Ema Chashecha Gedoyla Noifelas Alav. Ema is Bavel. Gedoyla is Madai. Chashecha is Yavan. And what did God say? That they're going to go into exile. And they're going to be scattered be'eretz lo lohem. Excuse me? Bavel is eretz lo lohem. Paras is eretz lo lohem. Edom is eretz lo lohem. Yavan is not eretz lo lohem. Yavan, we were in our land. We were in Israel. So how is that Golus? So I understand Bavel, Paras, and Edom, but Yavan, oh, it's not clear. I'm going to have to read it from mine. But Yavan, we were not exiled. How do you explain the pasuk that it says over there that all the Malchus have to be B'eretz lo lohem? How can you find Saras Yavan as a fulfillment of the Bris Ben Abasarim? Now, says Rav Hutner, the answer is, those who are heretical don't get Israel. Those who are heretics don't have a right in Israel. You know, one may say, well, at least there are Jews, at least they're living in Israel. It's not their land. Israel was given to the community. And throwing off the yoke of heaven is casting off the ways of the tzibur. If by doing so you abdicate ownership of the land. Having a shiur in Eretz Yisrael for someone who removes himself from Jewish observance is a stira minei ubei, is a impossibility. That's the chidush of Yavan. Through the decrees of Yavan, by the way, there is evidence that a very large majority of Jewish people abdicated the religion and observance in times of Chanukah. So Yavan's gezerah was very different than anybody else. Everybody else's is get out of Israel. Yavan's was, we'll get you out of Israel while you're still in Israel. You could still be in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, but you're not in Eretz Yisrael. That was the chiddush of Yavan. Yavan promoted, pressed their deya, their chachma. They could create Eretz Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael, their Eretz Lo Lahem. Can you imagine? You could be in an Eretz Lo Lahem in Eretz Yisrael. Because the Malchus of Yavan yearns to create a matzav of Jewish heresy. And therefore they created the following notion. They created the notion of Golus in the Holy Land. There is no comparison between Golus and any other Golus. Their Golus was much more fundamental. Meaning, he says, Oymek tohoi mafrid ben midas hanochriyos shel ben haba mi paas shegila mi beis aviv lemerchakim ubein hanochriyos shel ben hamistoy v'chatzeres aviv mikomagam hakol zor etzlaim mnei sheshal shemai v'shem aviv. Who's further from his father? Someone who was sent out of his father's house? Or someone who's living in his father's house and it doesn't even know his father's name? Who's more distant from his father? Who's more of a foreigner? Someone who was exiled, banished from his father's house? Or someone living downstairs from his father, and he asked him, well, who's your father? He said, I don't know. That's the difference between Yavan and all the other Galuses. That's what Yirmiyah said about his prophecy about Yavan. Namer shaked al areha. Namer, the leopard, which refers to Yavan, who is bold. She is diligent in her cities. The other Galusim, the wolf, the lion, they send you out of the city. Yavan is in your cities. Now, let's understand this. Let's understand the Yad Ramah of the second coming. The first coming we enter in times of Joshua. Second coming in times of Ezra. But it was not Biyad Ramah. When did the Yad Ramah happen? In the aftermath of Yavan. In other words, when did Bia Shnia occur? Through the redemption from Yavan. The exile and the redemption. When Golus means we're chased out of the Holy Land, then listen carefully. When Golus means being chased out of the Holy Land, Geula means coming back into the Holy Land. But when Golus means, and Golus has no connection to conceptual leaving the land, but Golus means losing sovereignty of Eretz Yisrael, right? In the times of Yavan, what was the Golus? The Golus wasn't leaving the land. The Golus was, we lost rights to the land. By giving up on the Torah, the land isn't ours. So how are we redeemed from that state? Coming back, we were there the whole time. The way we're redeemed is regaining control and dominion and sovereignty over the land. In the times of the first Golus, the Golus meant leaving. So we came back. It has nothing to do with Malchus. It's going and coming. Now it's not going and coming. Now it's losing Jewish sovereignty, which we're only zoichet to through observance, and regaining Jewish sovereignty. Now,
but isn't sovereignty really only when we have Malchus Yehuda?
Let's continue.
If we don't have Malchus Yehuda, then it's really, we're not following what the HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants in terms of...
I'm gonna continue. The way this redemption is manifest is by gaining control over the land. This is the Geula of Yavan. Because once we were redeemed in the times of Yavan, now the Hekesh is back. You entered in the times of Bayis Rishon with Yad Ramah, and now in times of Bayis Sheni we're coming back B'Yad Ramah. And now this is interesting, whatever was lacking in the Yad Ramah of B'Yas Shniya is regained now in times of Chanukah. Now, what was lacking in the Yad Ramah and B'Yas Shniya, there was a punishment. It was a punishment for our chait. Really, we should have come through Nisim, but there was a sin. Now, studying this deficiency, we see something wondrous. Because in the punishment that we did not enter with Yad Ramah, we do see an element of chesed here. Because listen to this. The Torah promises, V'heviacha v'hetivcha me'avaisecha. Here, I'm pointing over here. God says, V'heviacha, I'm going to bring you back to the land, and I'm going to do better for you than I did to your forefathers. How is that? The havtacha of the second coming being better than the first coming, because Chazal say, the first time we entered Eretz Yisrael, we were only chayv and Truma and Meiser after 14 years. 7 years of conquering, 7 years of dividing. And you entered immediately and you were obligated. In other words, Chazal say like this: the first time we entered Eretz Yisrael, we were not chayv and Truma and Meiser until after 14 years. The second time, we were chayiv immediately. Why? Because the first time we came in through conquering. So until you're conquered, we're not zoichet to the land. The second time, they didn't conquer. So as soon as they walked into the land, they were chayiv and Trumas and Meiser. So there was actually a benefit and a chesed in the fact that the B'Yas Shniya was less powerful than B'Yas Rishona. Since B'Yas Rishona was with conquering, so until we conquered, we're not chayiv. But the fact that B'Yas Shniya had a deficiency that we didn't come in B'Yad Ramah, we didn't really conquer, so then we acquired the land immediately. In fact, he adds the words of the Rambam. The Rambam says, what's the difference between B'Yas Rishona and B'Yas Shniya? Kitcha Rishona, Kitcha Shniya. Kitcha Rishona was only L'shaita, v'loi Kitcha L'asalavai. Kitcha Shniya was even Kitcha L'asalavai. The Rambam says the reason is, the first time around it was through conquering. So once the conquering was batal, the Kedusha was batal. The B'Yas Shniya was not because of conquering. It's just we took the land. So the fact that we didn't go in B'Yad Ramah and we just walked in, that allowed us to be mechuyev mitzvahs immediately and allowed us to be zoichen Kedusha eternally. So the fact that B'Yas Shniya was deficient, had a lot of milos. He's just pointing out that sometimes a lowered status is actually a benefit. The lowered status that we didn't go in B'Yad Ramah made it that we're chayiv and Trumas and Meisus immediately, and made it that Kedusha remains eternally. Now, according to this, we understand, this is clear already. Now we can read inside. Now we can understand the order of the Malchus. After the redemption from Persia came the Golus of Yavan. The redemption from Persia was coming into the land. We came into the land, so immediately Eretz Yisrael had more Kedusha than it ever had. Because since it was sanctified by coming, once we were in the land, it was sanctified for all times. And no matter how many times we were left, and we were chased out, nothing could remove the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. And we were Chaim and Trumas Ma'asos right away. Now, we are still lacking that we didn't come in B'Yad Ramah. So now comes Golus Yavan with its great chidush, to completely turn over Eretz Yisrael, where God gave us Eretz Yisrael, and because of our behavior in Eretz Yisrael, we could be in the land, and we're in an Eretz land. We lost the land. Meaning, Galus Yavan created what is called Yetzirah of Eretz Land while still in the borders of Eretz Yisrael. Now, says Rav Hutner, the promise that God will do better to us in Bia Shnia, Lo hishina, lo hisiga es shleimus kiyuma ad porkan Yavan. The true added element of the Bia Shnia being better than Bia Rishino did not come to fruition until the being redeemed from Yavan. Because until we were redeemed from Yavan, then there was still something lacking in the second coming. You know what was lacking in the second coming? True, we were chayim and Chumash Ma'asos right away. True, it had eternal kedusha, but it wasn't biyad Rama. We were lacking biyad Rama. So the hatava me'avos was only in one aspect, but not regarding the Yad Rama, and that came to fruition in the times of Chanukah. Marv Rabbi Sai, now we understand why the Rambam had to say that part of the Chanukah story is Jewish sovereignty, the restoration of Jewish Malchus, and the instatement of monarchy to the Jewish people. Because Galus Yavan was different than any other Galus. Every other Galus we were chased out, so the Geula is come back in. But Galus Yavan was, we weren't chased out, but we sort of lost our grip of our rights to the land of Israel, being that Eretz Yisrael is given to the tzibur and to those who observe Torah mitzvahs. So therefore the way that the Geula is manifest then is control over the land, taking the reins of the land, namely through the restoration of Jewish Malchus. Now, the Rav Hutner just points out that the second coming was better than the first coming, in that you were chayiv in Chumash Ma'asos right away, and in that it had eternal kedusha. It was lacking in that we didn't come in biyad Rama, but Chanukah was, so to speak, the fulfillment of the real coming into Eretz Yisrael. So this explains why it's so critical for the Rambam to mention that this dafka happened by Bayis Sheni. Bayis Rishon, it was merely a time of coming into the land. So we don't have to establish monarchy. We just have to come back into the land. But since it happened during Bayis Sheni, when we were remained in the land, therefore the Geula was in such a way where it was manifest by the restoration of Malchus. Okay, Rabbi Isai, thank you so much for listening, and I wish everyone a wonderful Shabbos and a Freilich and Chanukah, and all the best. Please, if you get a chance, you could check out our email or go to rabbidg.com to get the first sheet that we learned from on Parshas Vayeshev, and please share it with your family. Wishing everyone a good Shabbos and a Freilich Chanukah. Shkoyach.
Rabbi, we're having regular Shiur next week?
So Monday is regular, and there's no Igeres Hagra, but the other Shiurim should be on, except for the Iyun Shiur on Sunday morning is not confirmed right now. Okay. Right. Kol Tov, everyone. Shabbos. Kol Tov.
Thank you. Shabbos.
Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.